Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about fractions. Fractions like 1/2, 3/4, 7/15. We're going to learn how you'd add, subtract, multiply, and divide them. Now, what is a fraction? Well, very simply, a fraction is a part over a whole. Now, when we're talking about fractions, there's two very important words. We have the numerator, which is the top part of the fraction, and then we have the denominator, which is the bottom of the fraction. And now I'm going to start by diving right into multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. And you're going to learn the rules for these operations. But if you stay to the end of the video, I'm also going to show you how you can visualize these operations, because it's important to know how to do these things, but it's also important to know why they work and where these numbers are coming from. So let's get into it, starting with multiplication. So if we have 1/2 times 3/4, all we have to do is multiply the numerators and then multiply the denominators. When we multiply the numerators, we get 1 times 3. When we multiply the denominators, we get 2 times 4. 1 times 3 is 3, and 2 times 4 is 8, and so that gives us our answer, which is 3/8. Let's do another example. Here we have 4/8 times 2/3. All we need to do is multiply the numerators, which would be 4 times 2, and then multiply the denominators, which would be 8 times 3. 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 3 is 24, so that gives us 8/24. And now this answer is correct, but we can simplify it further. What this means is that 8 and 24 have a common factor. In other words, they are divisible by the same number, because 24 can divide by 8 to get us 3, and 8 can divide by 8 to get us 1. And that means the simplified version of this fraction is 1/3. All right, now let's take a look at division. Division of fractions is a little bit more complicated than multiplication. Let's look at the example 1/2 divided by 3/4. In order to do this operation, we're going to have to use a trick that I call the double flip. So here's how you do that. You keep the first fraction the same. So we have 1/2. Then you're going to flip the divide sign and turn it into a multiplication. Then you're going to do your second flip, which is when you switch the numerator and denominator from your second fraction. So you can see we had 3/4, and now we have 4/3. And so what we're doing is we're multiplying our first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. And so from here, the steps are exactly the same as what we did for the multiplication of fractions. We just have to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. And that would get you 4/6. But we can simplify this fraction further. Both 4 and 6 are divisible by 2. So we can divide 4 by 2 and 6 by 2 to get us 2/3. And that's our final answer. Let's do another example. Here we have 3/8 divided by 1/4. And remember, we're going to do our double flip. So we'll keep 3/8 the same. Then we'll change divide to multiply, and then we'll flip 1/4 into 4/1. And now we can multiply. So we have 3 times 4 in our numerator and 8 times 1 in our denominator. And that gets us an answer of 12/8. But this can be simplified further, because both 12 and 8 are divisible by 4. So 12 divided by 4 gets us 3, and 8 divided by 4 gets us 2. So our final answer is 3/2. So that's how you would divide fractions. Now let's take a look at addition. When we're adding fractions, the key here is that we need a common denominator. Let's take a look at this example. We have 1/2 plus 3/4. We need a common denominator, which means we need the denominators in both fractions to be the same number. Currently, our denominators are 2 and 4. How can we make 2 the same number as 4? Well, we can multiply it by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. And now what's really important to remember is that when you're dealing with fractions, anytime you make a change to the denominator, you need to do the exact same thing to the numerator. So in this case, we multiplied the denominator by 2, which means we need to multiply the numerator by 2 as well. And now we can rewrite our fraction as 2 over 4 plus 3 over 4. And with that, we're almost done. The last step is to simply add the numerators. So in this case, we have 2 plus 3 over 4. And that gives us a final answer of 5 over 4. And now what's great is that the subtraction of fractions is exactly the same as addition. All you need to do is find a common denominator, and then you're going to subtract the numerators. So let's take a look at this example. We have 3 over 4 minus 1 over 6. Our first step is to find a common denominator. The easiest way to find a common denominator is to just multiply the denominators by themselves. So in this case, we would have 4 times 6 for our first fraction. And remember, you'll also have to multiply the numerator by 6. And then for our second fraction, we would do 6 times 4. And then you also have to multiply the numerator by 4. And now when we do that, we get 18 over 24 minus 4 over 24. And now that we have a common denominator, all we have to do is subtract the numerators. 18 minus 4 gives us 14 over 24. And now this fraction can be simplified because both 14 and 24 are divisible by 2. So 14 divided by 2 would get us 7, and 24 divided by 2 would get us 12. And that's our final answer, 7 over 12. And that's the end of this lesson. You know how to multiply, divide, add, and subtract fractions. But for those of you who want to actually visualize these operations, keep watching. Because to me at least, this is where it gets really exciting and cool. Let's start with multiplication. Let's say we have 1/2 times 1/4. If we use the rules that we just learned, we know we just need to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. And that would give us our final answer of 1 over 8. And now let's visualize what's happening. 1/2, that represents 1/2 of a whole. And now what does it mean to multiply that 1/2 by 1/4? The way I say it in my head is take 1/4 of that 1/2. So if we were to take our 1/2 and split it into 4 equal parts, we would take one of those 4 parts. And you can see we would be left with this red part. That's 1/4 of the 1/2. And because we split the first half into 4 equal parts, let's also split the second half into 4 equal parts. And now you can see we have 8 equal parts of our whole. And so now looking at the part that I shaded in red, you can see that we are left with 1/8 of the whole. And so that's how I would visually represent multiplication of fractions. Let's do one more example. So here we have 3/4 times 1/3, and that would get us 3 over 12, which we could simplify to 1 over 4. And now I'm going to visualize this with a circle this time. So we have 3/4, which means we would take our circle, split it into 4 parts, and we're working with 3 of those 4 parts. So how do we visualize the times 1/3? Well, I read that as take 1/3 from that 3/4. So we have 3 shaded parts, and I'm going to take one of them and highlight it in blue. And I hope you can see that that blue part represents 1/4 of the whole circle. And that's why our answer for 3 over 4 times 1 over 3 is 1 over 4. Now let's take a look at division. For our first example, we have 1/2 divided by 1/4, and that would give us 4 over 2. 4 divided by 2 is just 2. Let's visualize this. We know 1 over 2 is half of a whole. So I'll draw a rectangle like this and then cut it in half. But what does divide by 1 over 4 mean? Well, the way I read it is it's asking us how many 1/4 will fit in that 1/2. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm going to split it into 4 equal parts. One of those equal parts represents 1/4. And I hope you can see that we would actually fit 2 1/4 in that 1/2. And that's why our answer is 2. We can fit 2 quarters in 1/2. Let's look at another example that's a little bit more complicated. Here we have 2/3 divided by 1/4. And you can use your division rules to show that the answer would be 8/3. But let's visualize this. 2/3 represents 2/3 of a whole. So if I draw a rectangle, split it into 3 equal parts, we can shade in 2 out of 3 of those parts. And now we know that the divide by 1/4 is really asking us, how many 1/4 can we fit in 2/3? And now what's tricky about this question is that if I were to draw 1/4, you can't clearly see how many 1/4 would fit in that 2/3. You'd be guessing at best. And so we need to change the way we're looking at this. We need to split each rectangle into the same number of parts. And now really what we're doing is we're finding a common denominator. If we look at 2/3 and 1/4, we can see that we can multiply 3 by 4 and 4 by 3 to get a common denominator of 12. And so when we do this, we convert 2/3 into 8/12 and 1/4 into 3/12. And now we can split each of these rectangles into 12 equal parts. Let's focus on our first rectangle. This is supposed to represent 2/3, which we know is 8/12. So I'll shade in 8 equal parts. Now let's look at our second rectangle. This has to represent 1/4, which we know is 3/12. So I will shade in 3 equal parts. And so now that we've properly visualized this, let's return back to the question. We want to know how many 1/4 fit in that 2/3. So we know 3 of these parts is equal to 1/4. So looking at our 2/3, we can see that we have 1, 2, 3, that represents 1/4. 1, 2, 3, that represents another quarter. And then there's 2 left over. So our 2/3 contains 1 1/4, another 1/4, and then 2/3 of a quarter. And when we add this up, 1 plus 1 is 2. So we have 2 full quarters plus 2/3 of a quarter. We can do some simple fraction addition, and that would get us 6 plus 2/3, which is 8/3. So that's how we visualize our answer. Let's move on to our final topic, which is adding and subtracting fractions. So in this example, we have 1/2 plus 1/3. We know we need a common denominator, and that would get us a final answer of 5/6. Let's visualize this. We know 1/2 represents half of a whole, and we know 1/3 represents a third of a whole. But now looking at these rectangles, it is not clear how we can just add them together. So we need to make a common denominator so that we're adding equal parts. We know our common denominator is 6, which tells us we should break our rectangles down into 6 equal parts. Our first rectangle here is supposed to represent 1/2. What is 1/2 of 6? Well, that is 3. So I will shade in 3 equal parts. Looking at our second rectangle, that needs to represent 1/3. What is 1/3 of 6? Well, that is 2. So I will shade in 2 equal parts. And now because our shaded regions are equal sizes, we can just add them together. In our first rectangle, we have 3. In our second rectangle, we have 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. And so our final answer would be 5/6. And that's the end of this discussion on fractions and how you can multiply, divide, and add and subtract them. I hope you enjoyed the visualization aspect of this lesson because honestly, it took me a long time to be able to understand it myself. I was so used to just following the operational rules and getting the answer and never really thinking about what the answer meant and what it looked like. And so I actually had a lot of fun learning this myself. Let me know in the comments if you actually visualize it differently or do any of these operations in a different way. I'm always curious to know. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.